Thank you. I'm going to call tonight's meeting to order. Roll call, please.
Councilmember McCardle?
Here.
Councilmember Murray?
Present.
Councilmember Ryan?
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Wall?
Here.
Councilmember Woodard?
Here.
Mayor Matsumoto Wright?
Here.
And Councilmember Sonmore asked to be excused.
Move to excuse. Second.
It's been moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? She's excused. And next on our agenda is the review of the ordinance granting new Cingular Wireless PCS LLC, AKA AT&T, a non-exclusive franchise, first reading with our interim city manager.
Good evening. Good evening. For the record, Stephen Clifton, acting city manager. The city was recently contacted by Wireless Policy Group, LLC, on behalf of AT&T, requesting the city grant a non-exclusive franchise for purposes of operating and maintaining a wireless telecommunications network. A similar franchise was approved by the city in 2008, which was extended by the city through March 17, 2019, and this does relate to an existing macro cell facility within the city's right-of-way located on a pole owned by Snohomish County PUD at 22725 44th Avenue within the city limits. Upon receipt of the request, the city contracted with River Oaks Communication to assist with negotiating and reviewing a new franchise. Bob Dushan, River Oaks Vice President, is attending tonight's meeting via Zoom and is available to answer any questions the council might have. Additionally, I see that Lauren Paolini with AT&T is also attending. And I should note that I've worked with Bob Dushan on a number of franchise agreements in previous capacities, and he has worked with a number of cities in Snohomish County as well as the county itself in negotiating a variety of franchise agreement. The parties recently concluded negotiations, and an ordinance is in this evening's council packet for an initial review and reading and consideration of granting a non-exclusive franchise. The franchise, if approved by the Mountlake Terrace City Council, would grant the rights requested by franchisee subject to certain terms and conditions which, approved by the council, are acceptable to both parties. The franchise is 70-plus pages, so that's a lot of reading for the council and the public. And so what I did, and Bob helped me with this, is contained within your memorandum is a summary of the key provisions of the agreement. The franchise term, 10 years, with the potential to extend the franchise an additional 5 years. It's a non-exclusive franchise, and what that means is the city is specifically reserving the right to grant at any time such additional permits or franchises for additional cable communication systems as it deems to be appropriate. Additionally, AT&T has an existing macro cell facility, as I mentioned earlier, on a Snohomish County PUD pole, and the franchisee contains permit requirements. You'll find that in section 8.2. And this does require that whenever the franchisee commences work in any rights of way for the purposes of excavation, installation, construction, repair, maintenance, or relocation of its facilities, then it shall apply to the city for permits to do so. AT&T is to reimburse the city for the city's actual administrative expenses and legal costs regarding this franchise. For example, payment of expenses related to contracting with River Oaks Communications, and we made sure that AT&T did agree to such prior to contracting with River Oaks Communications. Indemnification and insurance provisions are included for the protection of the city as well. And normally, this item would have been placed on the November 7th, 2022 council agenda, but the revised Code of Washington does require 2 readings, and the readings need to be no less than 5 days apart. And so the next available date during a regular meeting is November 21st. So we plan to place it on the agenda for the second reading for council to take action. And if you have any questions, I or myself, or perhaps Paulina could, and Bob could answer any questions you might have.
Are there any questions? Wow, we have no questions.
Okay. Well, in that case, we will place it on the November 21st agenda for the second reading and for the council to take action. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Next is the legislative update from Gordon Thomas Honeywell.
For the next couple, I'm going to actually move to my regular seat, and I will just give brief introductions, and then the participants will actually sit in this location.
Okay. Which, with our lobbyist, Shelley Helder.
Okay, I'm back. Since 2012, the City of Mountlake Terrace has contracted with Gordon Thomas Honeywell Governmental Affairs to provide lobbying services at the street level. And during this time, Gordon Thomas Honeywell has enabled the city to obtain several $1 million in funding for the design and construction of the Main Street project, improvements to Lake Ballinger, and achieving policy goals. Contained within the council packet tonight is a typical annual scope of work for Gordon Thomas Honeywell, albeit it is subject to change year to year, depending on the council's adoption of the future legislative sessions. Also attached for council review is a draft version of the city's 23-24 state legislative agenda, developed and based on input the council legislative steering committee shared during a recent meeting. Shelley and city staff are looking for the city council acknowledgement and an expression of support for the draft agenda, hopefully tonight, if not by early next week. And the reason for that is that Shelley and Gordon Thomas Honeywell start discussions with legislative officials early December. So it's important to have the legislative agenda supported by the council so that Shelley can use that during her discussions. And any proposed changes can be incorporated into the legislative agenda before Shelley does so. As far as next steps, similar to what you'll hear from Jake, the City Council will consider and review a professional services agreement between the city and Gordon Thomas Honeywell, and will review and action will be taken in mid-December. That's it. Thank you, Shelley.
Thank you. Well, good evening, Mayor and Council. Good to be with you all. So I am here this evening, and I am going to just walk through some information to help you all think about and prepare for the 2023 state legislative session. So I'm going to cover 4 topics. First, I want to briefly review the city's outcomes from the 21-22 legislative cycle. I'll provide an overview of what we expect for the 23 session. We'll review the city's draft legislative agenda and then talk about the next steps. So very briefly, I wanted to remind the city of the priorities from the last cycle, because it's always helpful to remember where we've been when we think about where we want to go. In the 21-22 session, and as a reminder, the city, am I not sharing it? Oh, I'm not sharing it on Zoom. My apologies. Here, share screen. Thank you. Okay, better, right? Okay, thank you. The city adopts a legislative agenda that aligns with the state's 2-year budget cycle. So that's why we talk about 21-22 or 23-24 legislative agenda. We typically adjust the agenda based on what's accomplished in the first year of the biennium. So for the last state cycle, the city received $824,000 for the Hall Creek realignment and $1.2 million for the Main Street revitalization project, and that was for phase 2. The average capital budget appropriation is $800,000, and so the city received an above average appropriation, and not just one, but 2. So a really significant result from the last cycle. As we consider the upcoming biennium, I think it's helpful to have context of what the 23 session will include. So it'll be the first year of the state's 2-year budget cycle. It'll be 105 consecutive days, and the legislature's main focus will be adopting their new operating, capital, and transportation budgets. The state operating budget funds state agencies, including the K through 12 education system. And although the state's most recent revenue forecast came in with a lower than anticipated revenue forecast, it's lower than the most recent forecast, not lower overall. So we're still expecting a really robust operating budget for the upcoming biennium. The capital budget on the state side is what funds all bricks and mortar construction, anything except transportation construction. It's primarily funded through the sale of bonds and is relative to the size of the capital budget. Relative to the size of the operating budget. So the larger the operating budget, the larger the capital budget can be. And so we are expecting a pretty large capital budget, though we do know that there's already some significant demands on the capital budget, particularly when it comes to mental health and behavioral health. Finally, the transportation budget is what funds the state's transportation system, both the construction and operations. It's historically been funded with gas tax revenues, will continue to be funded with gas tax revenues, but because of the state's recent adoption of the Climate Commitment Act, or the Cap and Invest program, there's a new revenue stream. That new revenue stream is dedicated to transportation projects that reduce carbon emissions. The budget writers from the transportation realm are going to be really focused on implementing and providing additional direction for the Move Ahead Washington package. In addition to the budgets, there's going to be thousands of bills that are introduced and considered. The one that I want to flag for your awareness is the legislatures need to revisit their response to the Blake decision. So as you all know, in 2021, the Supreme Court ruled that drug possession was no longer a felony. The legislature, in response, determined that it would be a misdemeanor. When they made that decision, they set a 2-year sunset on that and said that law would expire at the end of June of 2023. So this legislative session is really critical for the legislature to decide, okay, what are we going to do about possession of drugs? There have already been a lot of discussions happening, a lot of ideas floating around about what to do. I mention it for your awareness, particularly because our Senator Solomon, has been really engaged in the discussions, and I anticipate will continue to be. The political context for the 2023 session will, of course, be influenced by the outcome of the November election. Although it's at this point anticipated Democrats will continue to maintain the majority in both the House and the Senate, there will be new faces because of over 20 retirements. So the retirements left vacancies in key positions in leadership, as well as committee chairs. And so following the election, the caucuses and the majority parties will determine who's going to have those positions of leadership and chairmanship, and that will have a role over the path that bills take throughout the session. Finally, this is the first session that legislators will be representing their new districts following redistricting. And so this is the first year that Mountlake Terrace will be represented by exclusively the 32nd Legislative District. And notably, that means that the Main Street project is now going to be represented by the 32nd. And so this will be the first session for the 32nd District to really be the champion for this city priority. So with all that context in mind, we'll shift to talking about the city's priorities for the coming session. So to identify the city's priorities, we convened a legislative steering committee, which included council members McCardle and Murray and key staff members. We discussed how the city could be most effective in its advocacy and what the city's greatest need is when it comes to the state support. Based on that discussion, I'm recommending that the city have a laser focus on securing funding for Main Street Phase 2. As you know, Phase 2 project cost is $23.2 million. And as I understand it, the city's planning to pursue a federal RAISE grant next spring. RAISE grants have a minimum match requirement of 20%. And which is based on the entire project cost. So based on the project cost, the minimum match would be $4.64 million. The state has already provided $2.45 million towards Phase 2. I'll come back to that amount in a moment. And so I propose that we go to the state and ask for the remaining amount needed to secure that 20% match, which would be $2.19 million. And then we would, message that to say the city is also considering investing in the project in order to increase the competitiveness of the application. And I understand that's something you all are considering in the current budget deliberations. I want to note that $2.45 million that the state has already allocated was in previous budget cycles. And so we will need to make sure that it is reappropriated in the upcoming budgets since it hasn't been spent yet. So I just want to add that caveat. While we've secured it, we haven't spent it, we need to make sure it's included moving forward. To pursue this $2.19 million request, it would be ambitious. That's why I'm recommending it be our sole focus. I also recommend that we enhance the messaging to focus on the broad nature of this project. As a city, you have really taken on an incredible endeavor, and I think to focus solely on phase 2 misses out on all the progress to date. So we would, through our messaging, explain that it's part of a much larger city vision that started many, many years ago. You've all done the hard work of adopting the town center sub-area plan, which is, we're already seeing the benefits of that. You've already finished phase 1. You're in the process of the transit connection corridor. Phase 2 is really this final step that's needed to complete a 10-plus year, $40-plus billion vision that is going to benefit the entire region. So I think not only is it just really impressive and worth sharing with the legislature, it also increases the competitiveness and makes the funding request that much more compelling. So that would be the top priority that we would pursue. In addition to that priority, typically the city lists a few specific policy areas. Then these are issues that the legislature usually revisits year after year. And where the city is not the lead on any policy development, but we can weigh in if it's appropriate. The statements on the draft agenda in your packet are all statements of support. And so in contrast to years past, I would propose that the city consider weighing in on legislation in Olympia only if it directly aligns with these statements of support on the draft agenda. In the past, we've expressed concern when something is contrary to a statement on the agenda. So this would be different than that. In the event that there's legislation that has a significant and unique impact to Mountlake Terrace, staff would bring that to you for your consideration and deliberation, and if the council directed, then we would weigh in. Taking this approach is different than what we've done in the past, and I would say the biggest downside to it is the fast-paced nature of the legislative session could result in a missed opportunity to have timely influence in the development of these policies. Otherwise, I would say the biggest benefit is it gives you all the opportunity to be more intimately involved in the details of policy that's being considered. So just to wrap up here, we're at November 3rd right now, and this is your initial review of the legislative agenda. At the end of this month, the legislature will convene in Olympia for legislative committee days. That's really the kind of informal beginning of the 23 policy discussions. That's when obviously we'll know the outcome of the November elections, and they'll begin to start to formulate what the areas of focus are going to be for each of the caucuses in each of the chambers. As Stefan mentioned, in early December, we're aiming to meet with the 32nd district legislators to brief them on the city's priorities for the upcoming session, learn about what their priorities are and how we can maybe partner with them. And then the legislative session starts the second Monday in January, which is January 9th. That is the end of my presentation for this evening, but I am really interested in hearing any thoughts or questions that you may have and feedback on the draft agenda.
We have Councilmember Murray.
Thank you, Mayor. And thank you, Shelley, for the presentation and all of the hard work accomplishing so much already, of our goals that we've outlined. To your point, the last, 2 years, we've made so much progress on our goals, and really excited to continue making progress here on Main Street Phase 2. And I think in conversations that I've had with fellow council members, as well as in our meeting, I think there's a lot of alignment in really that laser focus that you talked about, and really trying to drive that project forward and over the finish line. I wanted to go down to the additional legislative priorities, I guess, and just give some context from my perception of the conversation that we had in our meeting. Because I think what was evident to me is that because we as a council have not engaged in conversations, particularly around affordable housing and housing supply, we've kind of asked our staff and Shelley to read our minds oftentimes, and to make judgment calls around what common sense is for us, or what would have detrimental impact for us. And so I guess in thinking about those, I'm curious, I think where I landed, I wonder if that needs to be a legislative priority for us this year. I know that is important to each and every one of us. I think every one of us has expressed the desire to address housing affordability and housing supply, both in our community and recognizing the regional impact of those issues. And I think we have some work to do to provide clarity and decide for ourselves as a collective body what our vision is before we ask our city staff and Shelley to have to navigate weighing in on those things on our behalf. And so I wonder if, particularly given that we know that our goals this year are really to focus on Main Street Phase 2, whether it might be better to set aside some of those complexities that I think took up a lot of time the last couple of years, and where we've had a lot of conversation and not as much clarity, and really focus on the areas where we do have clarity and alignment, and then work over the course of the next year to maybe get some alignment so that we can better advocate for our needs here in future sessions. So outside of that, again, I really appreciate kind of the shifting of how we're thinking about approaching the work, Shelley, and just really do appreciate all of your partnership and work on our behalf, and would love to hear kind of what my other colleagues think.
Councilmember McCardle?
Thank you, Mayor. And Shelley, thank you again for coming in front of us and proposing this, and just updating us on where we're at. I do think that, being part of that subcommittee, you've captured the conversation. My only pushback on Councilmember Murray would be, I think we need to keep a pulse on these priorities so that they're not detrimental to the plans we already have in place, and in some way would compromise our town center plan or moving forward. So I think leaving them on there is not a bad idea, just, even if we're just keeping, like I said, a pulse on them. So I'd be in favor of just leaving it like it is. The other thing I would add is, under the housing supply, there's a hyperlink to the current and recent completed development projects. Since we're not making our parks and Ballinger Park a priority, could we have a hyperlink kind of in the same fashion for our parks, like what we've done in Ballinger Park and the funding, and as well as our master planning for Veterans Memorial Park? Just a hyperlink to that. So if this is sent out electronically, they can have access to that, since we're not going to be talking to them about those projects.
Yeah,
That'd be awesome. Otherwise, looks great, and thank you for your hard work.
I don't see anyone else's hand going up.
Are you sure?
Go ahead, Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And yes, thank you for all the great work that both the committee put in, and Shelley, that you've done over the years, and in helping us fine tune our legislative agenda coming up this year. First of all, I absolutely agree that the laser focus needs to be on funding. We've got to get this project over the finish line, and we need help to do it. And we need the legislature to do their part, and we're going to need the feds to step up on their end, and we're going to need to do some work on our own to get the funding. And we recognize that, and I'm sure that message will come across to legislators, that we recognize that we have our own role to play in doing that, but we need their help as well. So First of all, on housing supply, and then I have a question on public safety and what any discussion we might have had regarding public safety and the need to address that issue. We know that that is something that AWC has talked about. We know that our law enforcement agencies in Snohomish County and throughout the state have addressed this issue, and so I'd be interested in knowing if that came up as far as part of the discussion, and if we should or should not be placing that as one of our additional legislative priorities. And then on housing supply, I think the biggest challenge, as Councilmember Murray points out, I mean, we all recognize that housing is a critical issue, and I'm going to be talking about a little bit more about that on Monday night during my reports, because it continues to come up during my meetings that I'm having with Snohomish County tomorrow, Puget Sound Regional Council, Executive Board, Growth Management Policy Board. I mean, it is a huge issue. And survey results, by the way, say that it is the number, now homelessness and housing supply are the #1 issues in the state, surpassing now transportation, public safety, everything else. So more on that later. So it is something, and by the way, they expect elected officials to take action. And if we don't here at the local level, then they're expecting the state to do it. And that's where they are going to have, there is going to be legislation. We know it's coming. The question, and I think the key issue here is, especially on our legislative agenda, I don't oppose having it on our legislative priorities, and I agree that we need to keep an eye on it. But I appreciate the need for, if we're going to weigh in the key issue, I think, is how we as individuals on the council define detrimentally. And that's the challenge that we have placed on you to read our minds, and there's been disagreement on the council on how we should be approaching the housing supply issue. And so I appreciate the recognition that before weighing in on the detrimental with any concerns, that comes back to the council for discussion. Because while we don't like state mandates, they're potentially needed if we don't take the action we need to. We, on this body and cities throughout the entire state, because cities throughout the state have been part of the problem why we're not meeting supply. And we all the cities need to do better. And so I'll look forward to that discussion as we move through the session and you're navigating that. But I think part of the message that, because if we are going to keep housing supply on the agenda, part of the message is because we all agree that housing supply and housing affordability is part of the problem, and we take responsibility at the local level for addressing it, we support measures that will help us do that will help us move forward and to ensure that housing supply. At the same time, we recognize there is a challenge with state mandates and setting precedents that we're nervous about. But they may be necessary if we on this body and others throughout the state don't take the action they need to. So just a heads up and warning for all of us, I guess. On a related note, again, another topic I'll be raising on Monday night during my reports, part of the legislation that passed previously is that we are required to plan for and accommodate housing for all economic segments. And that is going to be a challenge for us because all economic segments include low income, subsidized housing, housing for up to 80% is going to be potentially 50%. That's part of the discussion that's going on right now within the county, is how we as a county and how each of our jurisdictions within the county are going to figure out how to address that 50% below 80% of median income. So anyway, sorry, don't want to get too off topic, but housing is an important issue and we do need to keep a close eye on it. So I guess I'd be okay with keeping it on the legislative agenda as long as We are very cautious about how we weigh in, particularly on when we have concerns and how we weigh in on those concerns. Thank you. And again, thank you for all the great work.
Anyone else? Councilmember Woodard?
I definitely want to echo, thank you for the work you've been doing and continue to do for us. That said, switching now to being solely represented by the 32nd LD, is there anything we can be doing on our side that's, helping you do your job a little bit easier? I think sometimes we find ourselves in one-on-ones, and when I think about a laser focus, I have my own interests, but I want to make sure that I have the city's interests at heart. And I'll use as an example, I will say us passing the MFTE, that seems like something we'd want to bring up as evidence of why they should continue to invest specifically in our city. But is that actually fraying the message a little bit there, or should we keep it a little bit more boom, 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 if you will? These are the three things you should say every time you see them before you even say hello. I'm open to that.
I guess. Thank you. That's an excellent question. And I guess the most direct way to answer the question is having the laser focus on Main Street means that when you see a member of the city's legislative delegation, or any legislator for that matter, we're talking about Main Street. We're talking about progress to date and what needs to be done in order to get it across the finish line. That being said, MFTE and other local decisions that the city is taking in order to support the broader local and state priorities of increasing housing stock, increasing housing options. I think that all goes along with the broader Main Street vision of creating a sense of place and creating more housing options. So I guess I would say you don't need to ignore everything else, but you need to start with Main Street. And if there's opportunity, then talk about something else. Yeah.
Okay. Public safety on this?
I think there was a question about whether that came up in the conversation, and I don't recall that coming up in the discussion with the Legislative Steering Committee. I would say if it is something that the city would like to weigh in support of, it would be worth having a statement on the legislative agenda. If you have, an agreement on council about wanting the state to take action on providing clarification on what happens when the current law expires, I think that's fairly understandable position for cities to want to have, because if the legislature does nothing, it's no longer illegal to possess drugs, and then law enforcement can do nothing. And so I think there's a really strong case to be made for the legislature to take some type of action and to give law enforcement clarity, as well as to provide additional tools and resources to not just the law enforcement, but also courts. So that if you're looking for advice, that is a position that other jurisdictions are taking.
So should we put that on our list here? Oh, Councilmember Murray?
Thank you, Mayor. So one of the things that's included in our draft legislative agenda is support of AWC's legislative agenda, which maybe for clarity's sake would be helpful in future years to call those specific items out versus just kind of that blanket statement, so that we can make sure that we're digging into those. But that does include a response to the Blake decision addressing vehicle pursuits for public safety, basic infrastructure funding, increased housing availability and affordability, and providing behavioral health resources. So those are the items that they cover as part of that, assuming we want to support those.
Well, no one else? So everything on this list is something that I would like to support, but but also bringing up public safety, that is something that we're working on very hard in Snohomish County. So I wonder if we should bring it up here, because they're going to be working on it at the legislature this year to figure out what we can do to help our our police out there when they can't, when they have to just stand there and do nothing. We've got to figure out what we can have them do.
If it would be helpful, I could draft some language for the council to consider, and then it could be part of your packet for Monday's meeting.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be very long, but just something right in there,
Okay.
along with the additional legislative priorities.
So what I've heard so far, just to make sure, is an additional statement regarding public safety and adding in a hyperlink to the parks, since we won't be specifically calling out the Ballinger Park project this time.
Councilmember Murray?
Thank you, Mayor. I had a quick follow-up question, Shelley. So we're looking at housing supply, and there's 2 sentences. The first one, I understand how we positively affirm legislation that supports common sense solutions, and I won't comment on my thoughts on common sense again, but the second piece, I guess, so help me understand. So it says MLT has already taken many of the actions being considered at the state level and wants to ensure state level policies do not detrimentally impact the city's work, which has prompted housing construction throughout the city. So I guess how are we using that as part of our legislative agenda if we are not weighing in on things in the, if we're only weighing on things in the affirmative?
Yeah, the way that I would, what that statement would then communicate to me and then it be communicated to the legislative delegation, ultimately the legislature, is particularly around the town center. You guys have already upzoned around your town center, around the transit station. And so we want to make sure that if the legislature is considering something that's going to make cities adopt a must zone for, fourplexes in every lot in your city, it's like, okay, well, let's make sure that however the state drafts that it doesn't undo that you allow more than fourplexes in some of your zones. So that would be that's the intent behind that language, is to make sure that it doesn't undo the town center sub-area plan.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Yeah.
All right, are there anyone else? I think that is it. Thank you very
Thank you.
much. Okay, so next on our agenda is the legislative update from the Johnston Group. So we have Jake Johnson here.
Since 2007, the city of Mountlake Terrace has contracted with the Johnston Group to provide federal lobbying services as part of the city council's strategy of securing federal funds for various projects, such as Main Street and Ballinger Park. Since initially contracting with the Johnston Group, the city has received over $10 million in direct federal funding tied to the firm's work. Help with seeking federal funding continues to be key in implementing projects related to Ballinger Park, Veterans Park, and Main Street Phase 2. Contained within tonight's council packet is the proposed draft 2023 scope of services for the Johnston Group and will serve as Exhibit A to a professional services agreement currently scheduled for council review and approval in mid-December, respectively. Although a memorandum in your council packet contains highlights of the Johnston Group's proposed scope of work for 2023, Jake is here tonight to provide a legislative update and talk about future legislative matters. Jake?
Thank you, Stefan. It's good to see you, Mayor. Good to see you, Council. It's nice to be in person. All the work that's been done on the City Hall and the town center area, and Shelley and I were just commenting, this is the first time we've been in chambers, so it's kind of fun to get back to a sense of normalcy. Having said that, please excuse the mask. My family deals with some, we're operating under preponderance of caution still, and if there's anything that's unclear, I'm happy to restate it or, I don't know, create subtitles for everybody if necessary, or speak into the mic, whatever is required. Heading into tonight, I was struck by the state legislative presentation and how aligned both the federal and the state roles are for the city of Mountlake Terrace. And I was also reflective not only over the $10 million in federal funding that we've received, but also the leadership that the city of Mountlake Terrace has shown and what that's done for federal policy. You know, in some ways, we're a small city in between two big cities on an interstate. You know, and in other ways, we've had forward-thinking ideas that have changed federal policy. So it's not only that the city's Main Street plans to prepare for light rail were 10 years ahead of your neighbors, frankly, around you, but it's this idea that the Army Corps of Engineers, we could change federal policy and partner with them on small projects that were within their scope of work, but too small for the Corps to take on. That was an idea born out of the city of Mountlake Terrace. We changed federal law to implement it, and the city of Mountlake Terrace was the first recipient of that type of Corps partnership. It's exciting. And you're not doing that just with these two projects, but you're also doing it with culverts. The city's work for years with the state delegation back in DC basically aligned around a simple problem, that there was no single source of federal funding for the city to go compete for, to go get culvert replacement dollars that it was so important to get. And I don't know if we can draw a direct thread, but there was, for the first time, Senator Cantwell and Mr. Kilmer in the bipartisan infrastructure bill created a program to do exactly that. It's a program designed for cities. It is a culvert replacement program, and it's funded at $100 million. That is an idea that was born out of this city and shared with your neighbors, kind of in Western Washington. And the other idea that the city has led and that we're making progress on, but it is still our fight in the year ahead, is this notion of having competitive access to federal grant programs. For years, we've been too small of a community to compete on a per capita basis with our larger neighbors to the north and south. And not just Everett and Seattle, but LA and Chicago and Detroit. And as a result, we have been advocating under the mayor's leadership. We have been working with 33 other cities, led by the city of Mountlake Terrace as the chair of this informal group, to designate a medium-sized city set aside for certain types of federal infrastructure spending. And granted, we have not won this fight yet, but we made progress. And so for the first time, the RAISE program, formerly known as Tiger, formerly known as BUILD, a program that since its inception in 2009 had never awarded a city in the state of Washington below $100,000 a RAISE grant award. In 2021, Linwood and Bothell both won RAISE grants in that award, thanks to the advocacy of the Medium-Sized City Coalition here, which changed the law so that half of all RAISE grant awards must go to communities below 200,000 in population size. That is not the threshold we are arguing for. I want to be clear. We're advocating for a medium-sized city set aside between 10 and 75,000 in population size. But we didn't get that, and this was the compromise. And as a result, 2 out of the 7 RAISE grants awarded in the state of Washington went to medium-sized cities for the first time. The city of Mountlake Terrace, you're batting way above your population numbers, that's for sure. And we're making dramatic influences on the federal agenda and federal legislation. So forgive me for the reflective path down this journey, but I wanted to reflect on what we've done so far and the work still ahead. Our job next year is simple. It's continue to build federal funding partnerships between the priorities in the city and what the federal government can do. And there's a lot that's different. We'll get into that in just a minute. But our agenda at its core is to finish the federal funding for the Main Street Phase 2 program, to continue to make grant programs that were created as a part of the infrastructure bill and the climate bill that was just passed, to make sure that these brand new grant programs are set up in ways that are actually accessible tools for the city of Mountlake Terrace. And third, to continue to use the support that you've built with your delegation to get congressionally designated spending for the city's key infrastructure priorities, whether that's Main Street Phase 2 or others. And that continues to be our agenda, kind of in a nutshell. I can stand for questions right there, but it's probably worth talking about what will be different in 2023 compared to where we're at right now, too. And the first thing is we have a new member of Congress. It is presumed that Congresswoman Del Bene will win re-election to the House from the 1st Congressional District and will represent the city of Mountlake Terrace. This is great news for us, though we will miss the leadership of Rick Larson. Rick Larson, if the Democrats retain control in the House, is in line to be the chair of the House Transportation Committee. If the Democrats retain control of the Senate, Senator Murray is in line to be the chair of the Senate Appropriations Committee. If the Dems retain control in the Senate, Senator Cantwell will be the chair of the Senate Commerce Committee with jurisdiction over transportation policy. And Congresswoman Del Bene is the chair of the moderate caucus of Democrats in the House and is on the Ways and Means Committee with jurisdiction over tax policy, which is so critical for communities like ours. We've got a high-powered delegation. Now, we've got frankly, we've got the reputation and the trust metrics to build these partnerships at the federal level to continue to bring support for the city's priorities. Also, in 23, what's different? I fully intend that we will go back and do a round of meetings actually in DC again for the first time in, I don't remember when. It's been a few years. Zoom meetings are great, but I think everybody's a little tired of them at this point, and there is nothing quite as powerful as going back to meet with your colleagues, not only in the delegation offices, but then to walk beyond the delegation and meet with the Army Corps of Engineers, to meet with the Department of Transportation. If we have a RAISE grant that is in development, to go meet with the grant program staff at the US DOT. These are not meetings that can be replicated via Zoom. US DOT cannot meet with every community in America via Zoom. There's not enough time in the calendar to do that. If you fly to DC to meet with your delegation and the delegation can help you open that door, it's a way for us to put our best foot forward in these types of applications. So COVID permitting and your all travel schedules notwithstanding, that is absolutely my recommendation for what is different next year in the first quarter. Beyond that, I think that the alignment between your state capital requests and your federal requests also creates a really compelling, coordinated message for the city to frankly hang its hat on. You are preparing your community for all the things that we just heard about, for housing, for access to transit, for climate-friendly transportation policies, for frankly putting people close to jobs and putting people close to the infrastructure that gets them to their places of employment. Main Street isn't just a redevelopment of a sidewalk and expanding a road. It's a vision for what this community needs to be. And it's a unanimous vision shared by the council and frankly built on a decade of extraordinary work that the city's put in. It's time to deliver the federal funding and bring it home. So with that, thanks to the audacity of the city of Mountlake Terrace's idea that medium-sized cities should be able to compete for federal grant programs, we are recommending that the city pursue a RAISE grant next year. And we'll put the full court press on and see what we can do. That's the nickel version, everybody. You can stand for questions at this time.
Do we have any questions or comments then? Councilmember Woodard?
Give the man his money. Thank you. No, seriously, the work that you're doing is amazing. I appreciate that. And in particular, just wanted to make sure our residents, I think our council knows this already, that the culvert replacement program is speaking to the health of Ballinger Lake as well, and its part in the process for salmon. And so our forum, interlocal forum, met here recently, and some good work is coming out of that as well. I'll mention that on Monday. I wasn't able to attend, unfortunately, but reading the minutes has been helpful. But just kind of recognizing that a lot of the work that we're doing is interconnected because Ballinger Lake is listed at item 3, culverts are listed down at 5 or 6, but those are intimately connected to each other, and just kind of wanted to make sure that was made clear because Lake Forest Park, of course, has a lot more culverts that they're concerned about, but that is all part of this ecosystem. So, but thank you for the work that you're doing. I like the nickel version.
Thank you, Councilmember. A comment, Mayor, if
Go ahead.
you'll allow me. So the work that the city did, right, with the Corps of Engineers at Ballinger Park, right, was a forum-sponsored project that obviously benefited the city of Mountlake Terrace. But your work to build this new funding stream with the Army Corps of Engineers has led to the cities of Shoreline and Lake Forest Park working with the Corps right now to start a new process on Ballinger Creek, which is not in the city's jurisdiction, but it's systemic from this process and built on the success of what the city's done. This is part of the forum's ongoing partnership, and the city of Mountlake Terrace has been a strong supporter of the other two cities going forward in this process as well. So you're doing great work.
Thank you. Anyone else? Mayor Pro Tem?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And Jake, thank you for all the work that you've done. I would just, we've talked personally about how much we appreciate your work, but publicly, and to make sure the citizens understand what you delivered and helped us working together to deliver for this city is incredible, and we appreciate everything you've done. Couple of things, I forgot to ask Shelley, what is AWC's lobby day for us? What day do we need to set aside for us to be visiting Olympia, and then getting back to visiting our delegation in DC? What kind of time frame are you looking at, thinking would be best for us to be planning and therefore putting in our schedules to try and set aside so that I don't schedule over it somehow? And then, so those are I'll start with those questions, and then I've got a couple of questions on the agenda.
Yeah, the short answer on the federal side of this, there isn't an answer tonight. Part of it is if there is a change in control in the leadership in either the House or the Senate, I think you'll see a slight slowdown in terms of the implementation of committees and everything next year. That will slow us down. Traditionally, we have gone back somewhere between the last week in February and the first week in April. I realize I could have just said March, but we have tried to get in early when we can. I'd like to wait until the results of next week are known and then make a better recommendation to the city, but call it March.
Okay, thank you.
AWC is February 15th and 16th.
Very good, thank you.
Unless Shelley needs you in Olympia, in which case we'll go in April.
Right. Anytime we're needed, right? Very good. So obviously, very supportive of what's in front of us as far as the legislative agenda. Certainly understand 1 through 5 and know exactly what we're asking for there. I'm curious as to what opportunities, I guess, there are for us to be working toward environment and climate policy and community and economic development programs that might benefit Mountlake Terrace.
Yeah, there's a couple. Thank you for asking the question. Let's start with some of the environmental policy. So Congressman Kilmer has been working for years on a series of different kind of green stormwater initiative proposals. They've culminated, I think, in the work that ended up in the infrastructure bill and this culvert replacement grant program, but he's got a lot of other ideas. Number one is wants to do a refundable tax credit for homeowners to do stormwater permeation on a micro basis within cities themselves. So that would be a program that we have talked to him about in the past. That legislation has not been reintroduced as of today, but if this is an effort that Mr. Kilmer wants to lead again, I think the city would like to step up and be, frankly, a partner with him, even though he's not our direct representative. It's a phenomenal program that provides essentially a low-cost incentive for homeowners in your district to, if they're doing remodeling work around the home or doing, stormwater mitigation kind of in the impervious surfaces around their house, it's a great way to help with the stormwater issues that we have. So that would be an example of that. Beyond that, there's the Puget Sound Partnership, which has become a fairly active lobbying group in our congressional delegation, and really some clever and long-term vision strategies about funding for the restoration of Puget Sound. And that obviously has upstream and up-channel implications all the way to not only Lake Ballinger, but to the other streams that are within the city as well. These are initiatives where I don't see the city being the tip of the spear on some of these policy issues, but we would absolutely want to stand up with other communities and support this effort.
Sure. Yeah, very good. If I can pause right there, on a kind of a side note, in fact, just this morning in the Growth Management Policy Board with Puget Sound Regional Council, they were not introducing, I guess we've had several discussions, but we're getting close to finalizing the Stormwater Parks Project program and guidelines and guidance from on a regional level, and something that we might want to be taking a look at. And I want to mention it again on Monday night. But there might be opportunities for us to be working together with at the federal level related to stormwater parks and runoff and just those issues and kind of what you were talking about there. Other opportunities, tax incentives. Great. Looking forward to finding opportunities that benefit Mountlake Terrace and our citizens. Sorry, carry on with economic development.
Yeah, on economic development, there's several things. Number one, I want to make sure that there's the preservation of earmarking authority that Congress restored in 2021, but that is not guaranteed to continue. That's obviously been a boon to our community through not only the pedestrian connections through Veterans Park that we won that funding for, thanks to Congressman Larson, but we have used that in the past to do The Main Street, the water main under Main Street was done through two separate appropriations. The Lakeview Trail pedestrian connector between the interurban trail and the transit station, that was an earmark. We got phase 1 earmark money, and we got stormwater detention vault money for the facility that's under kind of the Main Street section right now. So maintaining that tool at the federal level is certainly a tool that the city of Mountlake Terrace knows how to use and use really well. Number 2 is the CDBG program, the Community Development Block Grant Program. This is a tremendous source of flexible funding for the city that is historically been on a waning curve. The amount of funding that's been available to the city has hit a bottom in, I think, 2017, and then slowly crept up in 2018 and 2019, but it's still down almost 70% off its highs. And the CDBG fund it's a flexible use of funding that can be used for civic infrastructure priorities, like not roads and streets, but things like senior centers or community centers or things like that, but can also be used for housing support, housing programs. It can help in roof repairs for people that are trying to maintain their property. It's just an incredibly flexible source of funding. It's also the mechanism by which the ARPA dollars were distributed to your community. So it looks on the budget like the CDBG program has been like extraordinarily well funded because we put all the ARPA money in there, and that was an extraordinary amount of money. However, those funds are gone, and we want to make sure that there continues to be a restoration of this fund back to historical levels. It's an extraordinary federal program.
Very good. Thank you. Look forward to working together with you to make those reality for us.
Thanks.
Anyone else? Well, thank you, Jake. As always, you have been doing so much work for the city, and we thank you. And we're going to continue to do that because we still have work to do.
Yeah, absolutely.
So if there are no more questions, I want to thank you, unless you're not done.
I'm as done as you need me to be.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mayor.
All right, so next on our agenda is the review of the third quarter police department report.
Well, good evening to all of you. For the record, my name is Pete Kaw, I'm the police chief. I have next to me newly minted Commander Scott King. Yesterday was his first day. The sad retirement of Commander Lowe has resulted in a great promotion of Commander King. And next to him, Commander Mike Haynes. So this year's third quarter report has come before you the third time this year, reflects consistent levels of criminal activity with some discrete decreases in the area of auto theft, vehicle prowls, catalytic converter thefts, area which we discussed last time all saw considerable increases during the previous months. These reductions can be attributed to increased patrol emphasis and an ongoing regional cooperation approach among local law enforcement partners. If you're following the news, just yesterday, the FBI was involved with a multi-state criminal cartel that was stealing catalytic converters and shipping them back to New Jersey, $500 million worth. So we've involved all our federal and state and local partners in a regional approach to this. These things are cyclical. I could be talking to you next time about them coming up again, but we're certainly working hard collaboratively to combat that type of crime. Firearms-related crimes have also saw a significant reduction for similar reasons. Again, partnership between state, local, and federal partners. The department will continue to work collaboratively with other agencies to address what has been a notable increase over the last year to the third quarter. The report outlines trailing highlights, community outreach, demographic analysis, code enforcement, investigations, and finally a case study of a serial burglary will be featured toward the end of the presentation. We're working out some technical difficulties here. I used to blame Commander Lowe for this stuff, but he's gone now, so I don't know who to blame. Maybe me? And just like that, I think we're back. Next slide. Next slide. So I'm going to quickly go through some of this stuff. There's a lot of material to cover in the statistical part of the report, but again, it's our mission statement. It'll be before you. I keep this stuff in every report just for context. Goals philosophy, again, same as you've seen 3 times this year now. Again, it's for context. Rickover's rules, we've gone over those before. It's how we get to achieve our goals. I'm not going to go over all the goals, but I would like to pay attention to some of the goals on the second page, particularly, next slide. The high standards and succession planning. We've had lots of retirements this year. I have selected and with the city managers, hired probably more police officers in the past 2 years than we did in the past 10. So the old guard is leaving. This group is very young and eager and a little bit more diverse than we've encountered in the past, which is a good thing, something we've been looking for. We're actively recruiting. We're showing up at the testing to talk to people that appear to be good candidates. I'm going to turn it over now to one of the commanders to talk about calls and statistics by the numbers. We'll be glad to accept questions at the end of it.
So I'm Mike Haynes, and I supervise the patrol division. So I'm going to be giving you just a brief overview of our accomplishments during the third quarter. Officers responded to 6,915 incidents during this quarter, which is about 450 more than the same period last year. 450 sounds like a lot. However, it's actually about less than 1% of a change. Community outreach continues to be a priority for patrol. During this period, we had 457 self-initiated outreach contacts. One of our best tools to deter crime and facilitate safe roadways in the city of Mountlake Terrace is through visible and proactive traffic enforcement. Officers stopped 1,212 motorists for various violations and issued 207 infractions, which is about 1 out of every 6 traffic stops. Arrests and domestic violence offenses remain consistent with the 2021 numbers. Property crimes were significantly reduced during the quarter. I attribute this decrease in large part to the emphasis on visible policing in our community during this period. Burglaries are up compared to the same period last year, and the difference is actually 5, which can be attributed to a single person, which Commander King is going to discuss with you guys a little bit later in the presentation. Gun-related crimes this quarter, we bucked the trend for what we've seen over the last couple of years, which is great news. Again, I attribute some of the success to visible policing within the community. Slide represents the demographics of our community. Staff continue to receive regular in-service training in regards to bias-based policing and emotional intelligence. Our goal is to ensure we represent our community values, which is accomplished in part by providing officers with the tools they need to identify and address bias internally and externally. The next 2 slides represent the number of infractions issued and arrests made by race. Both categories are consistent with area demographics. So our drone program continues to be very successful. Officers continue to incorporate them into various calls for service as they become more familiar with how to use them. Ultimately, they increase the safety of everybody involved in those incidents. Drones offer us the ability to utilize time, distance, and shielding to our advantage, which maximizes the likelihood of a positive outcome for everybody involved. And with that, I'll turn it over to Commander King.
So, talk about some training highlights. So training continues to be an important part of what we do at the police department, just to keep up with standards and keep our officers up with current trends. So with that being said, we sent Officer Look to FTO, which is Field Training Officer School, so that we could continue to train our new officers. We've had a bunch of retirements and promotions, so we needed to fill that void. And like I said, we have new officers coming in, so having somebody who's newer and energetic helps with that. We sent Sergeant Moss to training to develop testing and training standards for the drone program. Continue with training highlights. On the photos above, you could see Officer O'Hagan and Officer Voller for mountain bike training. We haven't been doing much with mountain bikes lately, so we got a couple officers trained up to go to that and get back into the mountain biking. There's a picture of Canine Harley at the Canine Conference. And community highlights. In the picture above here is Officer Elrod attending the Cedar Way Elementary School's 5K fun run. Some other community highlights. On July 28th of this year, the department held its first Cops and Clergy meeting. We had our second one this morning. Both meetings were a huge success. This morning's went a full 3 hours, and we never even made it to the training we had planned because of the discussion we had. We've been trying to do them every quarter, but because it was so successful and we didn't reach the training, we're having our next one next month just to fulfill that. Also, Officer O'Hagan and the social worker have continued to be active within the community and helping reach community members in need or crisis. And some more training highlights. Some more community outreach highlights. Officers participated in National Night Out. In the pictures here, you can see SWAT officers in a SWAT vehicle. Officer Elrod playing cornhole with a cop with a child, and Officers O'Hagan and Voller dancing with kids and their families. In this picture, you can see pictures from our first Cops and Clergy meeting. And we had some events with officers. Officer Fee graduated from the Basic Law Enforcement Academy. She graduated first as far as academics goes, and she graduated second overall in her class. She's a very bright officer and doing well in her FTO period as well. Officer Cron retired after 26 years of law enforcement, and Sergeant Pickard retired after 37 years of law enforcement. Code enforcement highlights. Code enforcement officer McKee started her new job after being sworn in, and she's doing very well. And so code enforcement property of the quarter. So code enforcement's been working with the Studio 6 to implement several changes. The changes have resulted in a reduction in calls for service. As you can see in the graph there, you can see we've had 30 calls for service in May, 22 calls for service in July, and 15 calls in September. So these changes have helped, and we've noticed some changes there. And animal control and evidence. So Tammy Custer was sworn in and started her new position. There were 11 leash law emphasis conducted, as well as several park checks during the last quarter. And records highlights. So on the left is one of our newest records specialists, and that's Sarah Nelson, and on the right's Sandy Newgarden. Sandy's been around for a while, and they've been working very hard. A couple investigative highlights. I'll skip up to the case study. So we had a burglary spree, which lasted about 10 days. And during the span of the 10 days, the suspect used the same form of entry into homes and businesses where he'd break into doors or pry them open. Once inside, the suspect would target safes or cash registers. A few of the burglaries were captured on surveillance. And here's an actual video of him trying to break into a place, trying to pry a door open. You can see him using a pry tool on the door back there, and that's how he broke into most places. A cell phone was located at one of the burglaries. A warrant was written for the cell phone and approved. With information from the cell phone and the surveillance, a suspect was developed. The suspect was located and charged with the burglary. For each of the burglaries in the cases listed below, he was also responsible for one more at the Timeout Burger, and detectives are still working on trying to, with the victim there, and trying to prosecute that one.
Wow. So,
Be glad to field any questions if you have them.
are there- Councilmember McCardle?
Thank you, Mayor. First of all, I just want to thank you for your service and just your leadership and just how safe you're making our community. That work is outstanding, so thank you for that. The question I have is, are you guys having discussions or thoughts about dealing with all the new electric ways of people that are getting around, like the e-bikes and the electric scooters, and just kind of how you handle that? Or, you know, because there's oftentimes I'm out walking my dog and somebody just goes, I mean, they're going faster than the cars on their e-bike or their scooter, and just kind of how, or you're interacting with those new modes of transportation.
We've certainly discussed it, and if you recall, we're actually getting some e-bikes ourselves in the next budget, but it'll be something to supplement the patrol, particularly in the parks. But as far as dealing with bicycle offenders, it's been a continuous battle to more and more every week. We see the same issues you do, and they're subject to the same laws as everyone else, and just because you can go fast doesn't mean you should. And I agree with you, something we're looking at.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? Councilmember Ryan?
On that line, used to be, what's the law that you could have even a electric or a motorized vehicle, if it's under 30, it could be on the road? Is there a certain thing? I don't know if you have motorized much. Occasionally I have a scooter that goes by about 30 and it's real loud, but I'm just wondering, wasn't there some law that you could have it on the road if you're under 30 or something?
I'm familiar with the RCW, but I wouldn't want to quote it incorrectly for you, but I can get that for you. It's been a lot of years since I've written a traffic ticket. But you're correct. There are some guidelines about what you can have on the road, what you can't have on the road, or shouldn't have on the road.
Yeah. The reason I ask is because some of these vehicles now, even the one-wheel skateboards and that, they're on the sidewalk going really fast. And when I back out of my driveway, I might hit one. So I'm just kind of curious with these new technologies now coming with electric and I don't know.
I'll look it up and I'll get it to you.
Okay, not that I'm going to get a scooter and go along.
I was hoping to see that, Councilman, but I guess not.
Well, if I do get one, I will be sure to wear a helmet.
Go ahead, Councilmember Murray.
I'll be quick. Thank you, Mayor. I just want to say congratulations to Commander King. Very exciting and appreciate you being here and appreciate, as always, all of the work that all of you do, and excited to see all of the positive trends and good things happening, and just really appreciative, particularly, and I think I say it every time you come, but the community-oriented focus. I continue to hear good things and positive feedback from members of our community, whether that's your responsiveness when they have issues or their overall feelings of safety in our community, and just really do appreciate all of the work that you do and the way that you go about the work that you do. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Go ahead, Councilmember Woodard.
As always, I want to thank you all as well for the day in and day out that you put your lives on the line, and just acknowledge that exactly is what you're doing. And thank you for that. Thank you for the leadership, starting at the top. Welcome to the top as well. I also wanted to acknowledge what you said earlier about the hiring. Not only was, as my understanding, the most hires you've done in a while, but it's also the most diverse hiring, which again, I think is reflective of the leadership. So I just wanted to acknowledge that publicly. And then I wanted to look back at the slides, and really just the one. If someone were to look at infractions and go, wait, you were 73, now it's 207, really more of a comment, which is to remind ourselves, you know, a year ago we weren't, as Jake earlier pointed out, wearing a mask and apologizing to us, and it really should have been the other way around. We're apologizing to you because we should have masks on. Depending on your opinion, I guess, at this point. Whereas a year ago, it wasn't your opinion. It was an absolutely expectation that you would, which is just my way of saying when we're looking at these numbers, are we seeing that that's really why these numbers are going up, is that people are getting back to what they used to do? I mean, for no other way of putting that, from a year ago to this date, as opposed to there's just more infractions. I mean, that's the one that, you know, more than doubles, but at the same time, as I look at the traffic stops, I say they're about the same, and I think those are tied together. So just kind of make sense of that, but at the same time,
I think
provide
it's
insight.
it's both those things. There's more people on the road, and also we're making during the height of the epidemic, we of course took a more cautionary approach to contacts with the public, and we probably made less traffic stops of minor nature, just to educate people. Traffic stops of a minor nature are usually for the purpose of education, not citing people.
Yeah.
We probably had less of that. So combining those two things, more people on the road and more encouragement to the officers to make contacts of a social nature. That's what you're seeing.
Yes. And so on that note, I want to leave it with, I'm really happy to see the COP going up. It seems pretty significant, 457. So just again, thank you for that leadership. Thank you for that engagement and opportunity to interact with the public in a positive way, as opposed to they've made a mistake or they are being intentionally out of line, and then having to interact with them that way. I think that this all adds to the education and puts a better light on law enforcement. So thank you for that.
Okay. I have a comment. I really miss you guys coming to the chambers to get your promotion. And the photo that, you know, you get sworn in here, and we've never done it in our new chambers. And so I was wondering, because I know that it's, you know, you've been doing a lot of it over there. I wonder if we can get that changed back to council evenings.
Sure, we can do that. We stopped it for obvious reasons during the
Yes.
epidemic, but we can start that again. We just haven't yet, but I'll make a note of that and expect us in a month or so.
All right. That way we get to meet the officers and we get, you know, because I think a lot of us have not met all the new ones. Okay, any other questions or comments? If not, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, go ahead.
If you want to move to the next item on the agenda, Mayor, it's still me.
Oh, well, I'm going to be reading the next agenda. Ordinance, review of the ordinance adopting the new trespass law language, code language.
Okay, I'll keep this short. On occasion, city staff encounter individuals in city buildings who exhibit disruptive, abusive, or criminal behavior. The city for some time enacted codes and provisions allowing trespass warnings and exclusion from city parks for such behavior. We really need a code to exist, a process that's defined by which disruptive individuals can be excluded from city buildings as well. Now, that doesn't include people at public comment, public meetings. We have a Public Meetings Act that we have to adhere to. The need is for an ordinance that needs to be balanced with individual constitutional rights as well as protection of the Open Public Meetings Act, due process rights, easily understood expectations of behavior. The proposed ordinance before you is intended to accomplish all these goals. It defines what is unacceptable and establishes a due process avenue for review and appeal. Beyond this, the proposed ordinance will provide us in law enforcement with an effective tool when dealing with non-criminal disruptive behavior. I have attached the ordinance as written by City Attorney Hillary Evans, and the staff recommendation is that you approve the ordinance, endorse its inclusion into the existing city code. I believe you can probably do that during the consent agenda, your next regular meeting, should you desire. I'd be glad to answer any questions about the ordinance if you'd like.
Do you have any, Councilmember Murray?
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Chief, for bringing this forward to us, and definitely want to, I guess, consider options that particularly are addressing, you know, unsafe. What were the words up at the top? I closed the memo. But I guess, so there was a couple of things we were looking to identify as part of this, right? It was
Disruptive, abusive, and
Thank you.
Specifically criminal or non-criminal
So
behavior.
criminal, yes, and abusive. And then I guess the disruptive part for me is the question, I guess, where some of my questions around some of the code language come in, and trying to balance, to your intent here, balance both the rights of the public to access public spaces with all, so making sure that there isn't illegal activity going on and that staff are protected. And so I guess there are some of these things that it's more gray, right? It is not necessarily black and white. And so I guess I would love to give some opportunity for feedback in our community, and whether that is our Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Commission, or whether that is just making sure that we publicize that we're having a conversation about this. I guess I personally don't know that I feel ready to approve and put it on the consent agenda. I think there's some conversation to be had about some of the specifics, you know, to make sure that we are not unintendedly creating barriers or targeting specific demographics of our community that we don't intend to, obviously, in this, but that might be impacted, you know, by in our attempt to do some of this work. So I guess that's kind of my initial thoughts, but I guess the disruptive behavior, I guess maybe the question, if I could get to a question, is like, could you speak to, I guess, the sorts of things that we are seeing that is disruptive, that you would consider disruptive, or that you have been getting reports from city staff around that maybe is in that disruptive category that's not illegal and that it's not abusive, but maybe it's that disruptive piece?
It's very much a judgment call on the part of the officer when they show up, but typically the things we've encountered in the past, loud behavior, cursing, name calling, just being obstinate and not allowing the staff to address their issues and talking over the top of them. We're not talking about criminal behavior now, we're talking about disruptive behavior. It's very, very hard to define in terms of black or white. Like you said, it's more the judgment call of the officer at the time. We do have some very strict rules about the behavior in the parks, but we're not talking about the parks now. So we tried to address some of those issues that you've just brought up with the city attorney, but we could certainly welcome another look at it. I mean, it's probably best to involve Hillary in that discussion, I think.
Thank you.
Councilmember Ryan?
If a council member has a particular issue with that, could you bring up that particular issue at this time?
Mayor Pro Tem, did you have something?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just following up, I'm glad you raised the topic. It is an interesting discussion item, and I appreciate the concern about being wary of adopting something that could be potentially misinterpreted, abused. I don't think I'm not worried about our police abusing it. But I appreciate the perception and the concern potentially from the public too, in making sure that we are taking the time to look at the issue carefully. And so with that, generally I would say that I'm pretty comfortable with, in my review of the language, and I'd be comfortable adopting it on Monday night on the consent agenda. But if there are concerns that need to be raised, then I guess my question back to you, Chief, would be, is there a need for us to adopt this quickly? And if there is there potentially, I guess, if there is concern that we need to address that specific section differently, but yet there's broad consensus amongst us to support every other item within the proposed ordinance, could we pull that section out for further discussion and allow us to move forward with the rest of the ordinance? Is that something that is doable, or, just even if it's pulling out that word, I don't know, but is that something that you would like to see us take action on Monday night for the content of the rest of the proposed code? Is there sufficient concern from other council members to pull out a certain section to address more, to make sure we're doing it right and not, and addressing any potential public community concerns that we're not overstepping in some way?
I'm not sure what section you're talking about, but typically with ordinances, particularly with all the legalese and these things, if you pull out one section, you pretty much nullify the ordinance. So if there's one section you're concerned with, that's probably, again, the conversation that should be had with the city attorney, and any of us could have it, I can have it, the city manager can have it. But if we can identify the section or the word that we're concerned with, we can take a look at that.
Councilmember Woodard?
Couple thoughts, and then I want to just confirm. So unfortunately, the ordinance keeps saying page 2 of 2, but I think it's page 3 where you get to C, and it breaks down what unreasonably disruptive to others, at least from a 5-point perspective, looks like. I guess I just want to make sure that doesn't that help take some of the judgment out? Obviously, there's still a judgment call to be made, but I just want to make sure that we point out that Section C appears to be trying to describe what unreasonably disruptive to others looks like. And I'll use as an example, racialize it. There are cultures that speak loudly, and that should not be considered disruptive if that's the way in which they're, I think the word I've heard a lot through my life is passionately describing their situation. Code for stop being black. So in that regard, I can see some concerns, but this one seems like this is trying to narrow what would be able to be reasonably considered disruptive. I'm asking and putting that out as a question. And then 2, this ordinance wouldn't preclude the process we already have in place, which the mayor, you can call recess, which in essence gives some space for the person to calm down. That's usually what that's for, I suspect, in other capacities before. So this isn't the first reaction, I guess, is what I'm getting at, right? This isn't a supersede what we already have. This is so we have some legal recourse or codified resource if what we already have at our disposal doesn't work, if that tracks. So that's what I'm trying to get at, is like, does that address some of this concern?
We're really talking about two different things.
Okay.
This ordinance does not address disruptive behavior during a public meeting. That's a whole different species of animal. This involves just coming into City Hall and being disruptive, not during a public meeting. So they're really two different things. The rules surrounding a public meeting are much different than this. Yeah, you're absolutely correct. So those are two different things, but it sounds to me like we probably need to work on this some more, that there's some concerns that are legitimate, and I'd be comfortable having a conversation with the city attorney about it.
Does this say that it is just at City Hall or at any facility that is owned by the city?
I was using City Hall for an example. It would be any city building.
So, I can follow up.
Go ahead.
Thank you for clarifying. My head was in this space here and thinking of something specific. So this is really, I get a water bill I don't like, which is not uncommon, apparently these days, and I come down and I'm really yelling at someone. Is that when this would kick in and you just would remove the person, or are we talking about there's criminal activity behind me yelling at you for a really high water bill?
That's not a criminal activity, and what you're describing probably wouldn't result in a removal or a trespass. It's something beyond that. Again, it's a judgment call. people get upset and raise their voice all the time. We're used to that as part of the business. This is something well beyond that, but it's hard to define specifically what it may be.
Okay, I'll go ahead, Councilmember Ryan.
It sounds like maybe the council needs to review this further. And there is a difference between, I am a public educator in elementary school. We do teach volume in the building. It's called indoor voice. There is a difference between loud voice, yelling, and screaming. And we have to discern those to teach kindergartners through the 5th grade. So if someone's screaming at you, that's not a loud voice. That's screaming or yelling. So we need to probably take a look at that because I think I know what you're talking about. You're talking about at the parks, maybe someone that's yelling and screaming at you and it's non-coherent. So I think that's where it's at. But if we need to take another look at that, I'm all for that. Thank you.
Well, I just think that it's when somebody comes in and is making a staff person uncomfortable because they've gone beyond. But we can talk about this, and but we need to do something. So we do need to come to a conclusion soon. Councilmember Ricardo.
Thank you, Mayor. I mean, just looking at it and reading over it and going through all the definitions, I don't think it doesn't call out anything in particular. It's not prohibited in my reading of in any way. It's just kind of like, let's be civil, let's be mindful and respectful. And if somebody isn't, then this is kind of an opportunity we'd have to manage that situation. So, I mean, a lot of this stuff is, you know, being a middle school principal, some of this stuff is in our student handbook, and it's all about just being civil and respectful and mindful and cognizant of your surroundings and how your actions or words are affecting those and their ability, you know, in the school setting, it's the ability to learn, and are you actively helping to create a safe learning environment, or are you detracting from that? Same thing with these definitions and the way somebody walks into City Hall or down to the Public Works building. Are they there to create, you know, a safe, workable environment, or the opposite of that? So I don't have any issues with this personally, but I'm willing to participate further in discussion if we need to. Thank you.
Councilmember Murray.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you to everyone for the good conversation. I guess I wanted to be a little bit more specific with some of the concerns I have. So they're particularly Section C. So it gets into the behavior that is unreasonably disruptive to others. And I think that's where we get into a lot of subjectivity around what is unreasonably disruptive, who is considered unreasonably disruptive. Are certain, you know, groups of people more likely to be considered unreasonably disruptive to others for the same behaviors? And so, I mean, I guess I think there's a lot of squishiness in here that for me feels uncomfortable as we're thinking about policy and we're thinking about, yes, in an ideal world, I think we would all come into public spaces and act civilly. And I think at least I would want to make sure that we tread carefully around over legislating the public's behavior in public spaces. And so some of these unreasonably hostile or aggressive language or gestures, like unreasonably loud vocal expression or unreasonably boisterous physical behavior, using electronic or other communication devices in a manner that's unreasonably disruptive to others. Unreasonably interfering, well, this one I don't have any complaints with. If you're unreasonably interfering with the free passage of other folks, that is, I don't have any, I think that's very clear and problematic. But I mean, we're talking about things like using publicly owned property in a way that it wasn't intended, including calling out shaving in a public restroom, for instance. Like, I think we need to be, I think there's more conversation that needs to be had, and I do think that thinking about this from a, with an equity lens would be a really helpful exercise for us when we're thinking about these sorts of, implementations of new code, and would love to talk a little bit more about that. So I guess that's where I was coming from, and probably framed it up a little bit better at this time, hopefully. So thanks for listening.
No, that's actually good. With your blessing, I think the best thing to do here, if you're asking for a suggestion, is to listen to the recording for this with the city attorney, sit and discuss with her all your concerns, and try to produce another product that meets all our concerns a bit better than I'm hearing. So that would be my suggestion, if you would prefer that.
So that would be not at a meeting, that would be separate? Would that be?
Yeah, I think that's a good idea.
Okay. All right. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So next on our agenda is the discussion and approval of interim city manager employment agreement.
Good evening, council members. For the record, Stephen Clifton, acting city manager. For the past 2.5 months, I've had the pleasure of serving as your acting city manager. And while it has added a great deal of stress to my life, I have to admit I've also been energized by helping lead the organization through a really significant transitional period. And you're all aware of the vacancies that exist and the challenges of trying to fill those positions, particularly in this climate where a lot of agencies are experiencing the same thing. And to date, we've, I think, been quite successful in filling some significant positions. In fact, today we're making an offer for a city engineer. I thought I'd give you some good news there. But in sitting down with the executive leadership team and the city attorney and looking out a few months and looking at all the things there are to do, collectively, we all agreed that we should recommend to the city council that you bring on an interim city attorney or city manager sooner than later. And we've had the pleasure of talking with Andrew Neiditz a few times, and I know that the council is familiar with Andrew's skill set and have worked with him individually in the past. And for that, based on that, we are recommending that you enter into an employment agreement with Andrew. And so the city attorney and the HR manager and myself collectively worked on an agreement, and that's before you this evening for your consideration and hopefully adoption of the agreement. The terms are, it would be a 4-month agreement, but it can be mutually extended. So I think that's important to note, just in case we go through the recruitment process for a city manager and you don't identify someone you like and we need someone a little bit longer, then you will have to, based on Andrew saying, yes, I could do it a little while longer, but that's something that you could do via this agreement. And then the base salary is, he's agreed to be paid the same salary as the previous city manager. There is the $500 car allowance, which existed with the previous city manager. And then also, there are termination provisions within the agreement. It can be terminated by the city without cause. The interim city manager would have to give a 30-day notice in order to terminate the agreement. So that's what we have presented before you this evening, and I have been able to speak with 5 of you, have not been able to speak with 2 of you, and based on those discussions, that's why I'm actually bringing this forward. So if the council could express or take action on this tonight, as stated in the memorandum, Andrew would be able to start actually on Monday, November 7th.
All right, do I call for a vote? No, hold.
Please.
Discussion?
Should we put the motion on the table?
You can.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Move to approve the employment contract with the Andrew Knight is on, for city manager, interim city manager. There we go. Sorry, I didn't have the correct wording in front of me that I needed.
Second.
So do we have a discussion first before we vote?
I would just like to say it's a good way to keep the city moving forward. We are a city in transition, and this is another transition, but it's filled, and I think, just the work we've been doing with Andrew, he's a good candidate. I don't know what word I want. I just lost my word, but he would be well-versed and experienced with continuing to help Mountlake Terrace move forward with all of our initiatives and everything we need to get done. So I'm on board with it.
Just go ahead. Go ahead. All right.
Here.
I'll just call for the vote then. Oh, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I do want to say a few words just quickly because this is such an important decision really for the city and important for the public to understand why we're taking this action and why we're assuming approval of this motion momentarily. I did want to just say why I think that this is the right move for the city and why we're putting this motion on the table with Andrew Knight as far as putting him in place as an interim city manager. First of all, actually, I should back up and say thank you to Stefan as the acting city manager. You have done a fabulous job over the last several months in keeping everything on track, putting things on track that got off track, keeping us moving forward, making us, getting us to the place where we are now and being able to deal effectively with a number of different issues that have been up in the air that have been challenging. We've been facing some severe challenges in the city, and you've made things happen, and appreciate it. And so I don't want to let that go by without recognition for what you've done and what an amazing job and how much we appreciate what you've done to be able to get us to where we are, and recognizing, due to circumstances, the need to bring on Andrew in this position. And so then getting to Andrew, for the public's awareness, because the public is not aware of what our interaction with Andrew over the last couple of years. And so I want to make sure they understand, first of all, that he is a former city manager in probably a number of locations, but I'm aware of particularly Lakewood, where one of our previous city managers left us to replace him, actually down in Lakewood. And so there's no animosity at all for that, by the way, but appreciate Andrew's, first of all, experience in the role that he's going to be taking on. But second of all, over the last couple of years, he's been working with us in the city council in the evaluation process of our previous immediate predecessor city manager, and is very aware of, because of that, in that role, aware of our city priorities, our council priorities, our interacting with the council members ourselves. And so this is a good move for the city and the right move, and we appreciate Andrew being willing to come on board to help us through this next phase of getting to the finding the right replacement and keeping our city on track in everything we're doing. So I guess, presuming an affirmative vote, we welcome you with open arms and appreciate your willingness to come on board and help us out through this.
Anyone else before I call for the vote? All right, I'm going to call for the vote. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? We have a new interim city manager. Yay. Thank you. So, do we have any public comments?
No one has signed up in person, but if anyone in the virtual audience would like to speak, please use your hand raise tool. Going once, going twice. That's the end of public comment.
Thank you. So, Has everyone reviewed the agenda for Monday night? Go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. I have reviewed it. We'll have to revise it. The
Yes.
consent calendar, item C will need to be removed, which is the trespass code language. So that's the only comment.
All right. So next is council comments. Does anyone have any council comments? Go ahead, Councilmember Woodard.
3 comments. One will be an ask of the council. First one is to acknowledge Stefan. I too wanted to say thank you for the work that you have done. I've said this publicly before, but just want to make sure that was on record, how much we appreciate everything that you have done, both that is known and things that we don't know about yet. I'm sure you've had a great hand in on keeping this city moving forward, so thank you for that. Welcome aboard is my second comment, and I'll just leave it there. Look forward to the relationship growing and seeing where that takes us, but very humbled that you have accepted our offer, and looking forward to working with you officially starting Monday in this new capacity. Third one, which was the one that was planned, Ivy League. Ivy League is extending an offer to the city council. Our next meeting is Saturday the 19th, and what they would like to do is have the city council show up, which means we'd probably have to make that somehow a formal meeting or whatever it is we do notice-wise, so we can all be in the same space. But they really want to show you the work that they've been doing as it overlaps with the great work that we're doing that Director Betts has brought to our attention and has been steering as well, but to really see how those two worlds come together. And I'll just leave it loosely there. The offer that I will put on the table is you don't have to show up until noon. But if you'd like to show up at 9 and pull some ivy, I would say wear long sleeves. That ivy fights back. And at noon, my family would support lunch in the sense of have lunch there for us. So it's not a city expense, but it is an Ivy League offer to you all. So I'll bring that up under formal business on Monday, new business, I should say, on Monday, but wanted to put that on your ideas now instead of your calendars. I'll ask to put it on your calendars formally on Monday. Just asking you to think about it right now. So it will be the 19th. We go 9 to noon, and so this particular case we would go noon to 1. And yes, we meet whether it's raining or shining, and so hopefully it will be shining, and it will probably be cold, so dress accordingly. But nonetheless, the 19th, Ivy League invites you to come see the work they've been doing and just hear their thoughts on the work that's happening in Veterans Park.
I turned it off because I just wanted to say that when I attended the zip car ribbon cutting, and it's what a zip car is, and it's a community transit is just, it's an experiment, and it's only in Linwood right now within these boundaries. And I would love to see it expand. It's like an Uber that costs you as much as a bus fare. So for $2.50, you can Uber anywhere within this little area right here for right now. But I brought this for you guys because if we can get this thing to work, then they will expand it. And we have a light rail station too. And I have more for the city.
Thank you.
And also when I spoke at the Master Builders, I picked up a few other of their housing toolkits, and I only have 3. Okay, so, well, I guess there's 4 right here. If you would like to see a copy of that, it talks about housing supply issues. And that is actually all I have. So go ahead, Stefan.
Yes, Mayor, Council, I just want to announce to the public that the biennial budget process, the public portion, starts Monday, November 7th. It will kick off by me presenting the overall budget to the city council, and then subsequently two evenings will consist of presentations by department directors, and that includes myself presenting the city manager and the city council budgets as well. And the meeting on the 7th starts at 7, but the two meetings on the 9th and 10th, because of how long they're going to last, start at 6 p.m. That's it.
All right. Oh, boy. Yes, 3 meetings in 1 week. Okay. I have lots of extra Halloween candy. All right, so anyone else before I? Okay, so if I see no one else, so I'm going to adjourn the meeting. We're adjourned.